I come from a small mining town in Arizona, where there is not a lot to do except hike. It was a good but boring area to grow up. Our population was small with little to no crime. My father owned the quarry where a majority of the community's economic strength came from. He left me a sizable inheritance after he passed away. I bought a truck and a house out in the plains with a basketball court and a pool. That was the sole extent of my lavish spending, but it was all I needed. Unless you count pizza. I didn't have many vices to blow my fortune on. I've never been an avid partygoer, luckily. Like a lot of people my age, one indulgence I did have was watching YouTube. Urban exploration became a most searched category for me from 2009 on. I became a subscriber of a content creator and urbex vlogger named Isolation Infinity. He kept himself anonymous and did not show his face. He used footage of the haunts he went into as captured by the body camera strapped to his chest. His voice's baritone became a signature element of the channel. He traveled all over the world and went into many chilling places. These included vacant hospitals, asylums, morgues, and train stations. He even stumbled upon a murder in progress once. A homeless man had stomped another transient to death in a farmhouse. He uploaded edited parts of it. This was a controversial decision. It almost resulted in a lifetime ban for him from the platform. The clips did help law enforcement later on nonetheless. He was also arrested a few times for trespassing on famous estates. The Houdini Mansion in Los Angeles was one of them. But none of his fans held this against him. We respected him for being willing to get into trouble with the law in pursuit of the next viral video. Late last year, Isolation Infinity announced he was going to have a live face reveal. It was only going to be for his patrons, i.e. those who gave money to his Patreon account. I contributed funds to it on a monthly basis. I viewed him as a pioneer of his entertainment niche and did not mind sparing a little change. He emailed me and told me I was one of a dozen allowed to attend the live event. He further stated it would be in a password-protected chat room. He also promised an exclusive video which would not make it onto the public video lineup. I was more interested in the latter than the former. I never cared what his appearance was, since I already had a vision of someone my age in their mid or late 20s. It was hard to convince me he looked any different from the picture in my mind's eye. Still, I was not going to turn down the chance to find out. Being able to brag to his diehard followers who did not get to experience it would be worth it alone. The night of the scheduled face reveal, I booted up my PC. I kicked back on a lounge chair in the second-story room of my house, which was my entertainment space. It was complete with video game consoles and my beloved Alienware computer. An opened bag of peppered jerky and a bottle of ginger ale sat next to my keyboard. I went into my email, the password was in my inbox. I followed the link. It led me to the video of a room with nothing in it but a red wall with a baby blue frame. The caption, Isolation Infinity, will be on shortly, rested at the bottom of the screen. I expected a home studio and instead got what appeared to be someone's dingy basement, in need of a new coat of paint. What bothered me the most was the sound of heavy machinery whirling in the background. I wrote it off as bad plumbing. A man came into the frame. He was slim and wore a trench coat with maroon buttons on its front. He reached down, grabbed the lens of the camera, and shifted it upward. The familiar voice we had all grown fond of started to count down. "Are you ready to see who I am?" Isolation Infinity asked. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 5, he hoisted it upwards and pointed it at his face. I froze. He looked nothing like what I had visualized. He was hairless, emaciated, pale, and had marble black eyes. He reminded me of Werner Krauss from the old German 1920 film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. His mouth hung open and tilted to the side as if he could not control the movement of his jaw. The most alarming thing to me was not how his features were not flattering. That explained why he valued being off camera for most of his career. What upset me the most in the beginning was how the disparity of his perceived age made me feel lied to. He always told his fans he was a young man, like most of his demographic. The individual before me on the screen was in his 50s at the earliest. "I have been fantasizing about broadcasting this for a long time," he said as he licked his lips. "You have made this possible, and so I need to show my appreciation by giving thanks in the most sincere way I know how." He moved the camera to the left, and I could not believe what I saw. A woman in her 30s sat on the grimy floor, her head down from evident exhaustion. Rusted chains circled her arms. She wore a tattered black top, as though someone's knife or nails had left wounds on portions of her torso. Stains were on her clothes. She had spent time in the dirt fighting someone, or clawing her way out of a soiled embankment before this. "Say something," he ordered her. "Tell them you can't wait to die." The blades of a chainsaw came into view and its motor revved. She whimpered with pain, and when she tried to murmur something, I saw blood drip from her mouth. I dragged the mouse cursor over from the right-hand side of the screen to see how many people were in the chat. The answer I received left me weak. No one else was there but me. The others had either left or were never there to begin with, and I was too stupid to notice until then. My heartbeat increased as I tried to close the window out. I couldn't. The X symbol on the right-hand side was visible, but useless. It was like every virus-infected pop-up ad you could not escape from. "What?" Infinity Isolation asked. "You don't like it, Mark? Everything I do is to make my most devoted subscribers happy." A chill ran through me. He knew my name. It took me a second to realize he had gotten it through my membership to his Patreon. The fact that he was aware of that I was his only viewer worried me. Was I going to be the sole witness to a barbaric act of murder? Calm down, I reassured myself. This is an elaborate prank he's recording right now. He's wearing scary Hollywood makeup, and she's an actress. This is all for the sake of getting more views. The chainsaw has to be a prop bought off Etsy. Still, my hand inched towards the phone to call 911. The way the woman expressed her misery in that moment was all too convincing. I held my device close to my ear. "I wouldn't do that if I was you, Mark." He stared right at the screen for a moment, his eyes making perfect contact with mine. Can he see me? He lifted the chainsaw above the woman's head. He brought it down with a noise from his throat which sounded like a cross between a scream and a laugh. A fountain of gore spurted out. The lens got hit with crimson bubbles. He cackled as I unplugged my computer. I carried it downstairs to my car and drove to the nearest police station. I filled out an incident report in an office with a dying lamp and the scowl of a detective facing me. He looked as though he would have rather been anywhere else but at work. For the first 2 hours there, I had to convince them that I was not a crazy person. They thought I was there to waste their time with a fanciful tale of my correspondence with some creep. "I hope it is all a hoax," I said. "If this is not real, no one would be happier about it than me. Here's my computer. See if you can't trace where he's at in case it..." I gagged before I could complete my thought. The idea of it being authentic was overwhelming. They had cybercrime go over everything. And a few days later, I got my PC back. It took about a week before I received a call from someone working on the case. She was a homicide investigator named Samantha Brown. "We found the killer was streaming from a bunker in Virginia," she said. "It's an old fallout shelter abandoned since the Cold War. He calls himself the I-73 Butcher, since that highway is his preferred route. He uses it as a screen name on the dark web." "Infinity Isolation is a serial killer?" I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. "No," she said. "The real Isolation Infinity is someone else. This maniac poses as famous people. He uses a combination of tools including voice-altering software and encrypted Wi-Fi. He hacks into their accounts. He gets a thrill out of making complete strangers watch his acts of terror. His tech-savvy ways also allows him to control other people's webcams. And we don't know how many he has breached. He is on several most wanted lists of different agencies. We have never found out what he looks like. The face he uses on those terrible live streams are prosthetic. He has maintained stringent anonymity and avoided the news cycle. I'm sorry you saw such torment. The good part is, you turning in your computer helped us at least find out his last known whereabouts. The scene is searched and we have found some evidence. He's still out there somewhere? For now." I went to bed that night with a host of emotions. I felt violated by a complete monster that sabotaged my privacy. Moreover, I felt dumb for getting swindled. I still feel shivers over the fact that he is not apprehended. Word of what happened got to the real Isolation Infinity, who has, as of late, deleted his entire channel. Many speculated on how victims mistaking him for an insane person perturbed him. Sometimes, as I lay my head down and drift off to sleep, I hear a noise by my window. I jump up and think it was a chainsaw. Thus far, it has been a neighbor's lawnmower every time. I hope it stays that way. Come on, Mom, I want to see the living tattoo, I wailed. No, I will not have a child of mine subjected to such filth. It's not filth, it's cool. Defacing yourself like some bathroom wall is just disgusting and disgraceful. Aw, Mom. No, that's the last I'll hear of it. With that, she dragged me away from the entrance to the freak show. We spent the rest of the day playing games and riding rides. The smell of cotton candy and pizza filled the air. The bells, whistles, and screams of joy from children having the time of their lives. Any other kid would be overjoyed with all the things we did, but not me. I couldn't get the vision out of my head. The living tattoo. Wherever I went and whatever I did, the sign danced in front of my eyes. It taunted me like a carrot dangling just out of a donkey's reach. I begged and pleaded all day, but Mom would hear none of it. I dragged my feet and screamed like I was being killed whenever we went past the freak's tent. She just dragged me slightly, ignoring the stares of people passing by. Instead of remembering a wonderful day at the fair, we were both miserable as she drove us home. "But the fair will be gone in 2 days," I wailed as we pulled into our driveway. "All I wanted to do was see the living tattoo. You're the worst mother ever." "That's it," she yelled while opening the front door. "I've had enough. Go straight to your room and I don't want to see you again until your attitude improves." "If it does, will we go to the fair tomorrow?" She pulled at her hair and screamed as she stormed off to the kitchen and slammed the door. "Is that a yes?" The door didn't answer. I stomped up the stairs as loud as I could and kicked the bedroom door shut. Grouch. I threw myself on the bed and crossed my arms. I never get anything I want. I lay there, refusing to move or even turn my light on. My TV, stereo, stack of video games all held no interest to me. All I could think about was the one thing I couldn't have. Through the window, I could see a glow on the horizon as night fell and the lights from the fair lit the sky. Tomorrow's the last day. I'll have to wait a whole nother year. From somewhere inside my mind that never spoke, I heard, "Unless." Unless what? Unless you sneak out and go by yourself. Should I do that? She said she didn't want to see you again until your attitude changed. Will going to the fair change your attitude? Yes. Then there you go. You're just doing what Mommy wants you to do. A smile crept across my face as I slid out through my window. I snuck in through a hole in the fence and came face to face with a carny. "What do you think you're doing, boy?" he asked through his 3 invisible teeth. "Nothing," I said and started walking away. "Wait a minute, I know you." My blood ran cold. "Yeah, you're that brat that was whining at your mom today." "I'm not a brat." "Excuse me, Your Highness." I turned to leave. "I can get you in to see him." I stopped. "Who?" "The living tattoo." I froze in place and slowly turned. "You can do that?" "Follow me." He led me down a path that ran behind the tents. It was a different world back here. Squalor was the norm. Ragged people were lying on lawn chairs if they were lucky. More often than not, they just lay on the ground. Tin cans with rotted food, empty bags of popcorn, and discarded tubes for cotton candy were strewn everywhere. Entire armies of ants crawled over everything and everybody. He led me up to a large dark tent with a cigar store Indian sitting outside of it, then stopped. "There's only one question I need to ask first. How much do you want to go inside?" "What do you mean? How desperate are you to see? What would you give to go inside this tent?" "Anything." He smiled his 3 crooked teeth. "That's the right answer." He pulled back the flap and disappeared inside. I followed and was immediately overwhelmed by darkness. A musty smell hung heavy in the air. I thrust my hands out in front of me. feeling my way as I drown in the pitch black. Just as suddenly as the light had left, it reappeared. Torches lit the way to the center of the room. My eyes toured the inside of the tent. Strange shadow creatures hovered at the edge of the light. The flames danced hungrily in their eyes. Panic washed over me and I turned to leave. "What's this?" the carny said, blocking my exit. "You ain't leaving without seeing him." "Not after all the fuss you put up about it." "I'm not sure my mom would like me being here alone." "No, of course she wouldn't. That's the whole point, isn't it? You wanted to show her who's boss." His crooked smile was tinged with something else I couldn't place. "Come on then, up you go." He gave me a little push towards the raised platform in the middle of the room, where a large figure sat motionless, totally covered by a black cloak. The carny guided me around to the front where I could see him. The intricate pictures that covered every inch of his face were mesmerizing. A one-eyed pirate being impaled by a sword, a beautiful scantily clad woman, a strange symbol I had never seen before. They all drew me closer. I found myself a hand's breadth away from him. His eyes were pitch black, yet did not reflect the light of the torches. "Well, there you go," the carny said. "You wanted to see him, and here he is." For the first time, his eyes blinked. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I lurched back, but the carny caught me and held me fast. "He heard all about you, of course. You and that little show you put on today. He's wanted to meet you ever since." Why?" I stammered. "He's never met someone so selfish, so unconcerned about anyone else. He wanted to know how you do it." "Do what?" "Ignore every feeling of right and wrong inside you. Ignore the woman who gave you life. Ignore the common sense that God gave even a rat, just so you could have your own way." I glanced back at the carny with contempt. When I looked again, the pirate wasn't staring at the woman anymore. He was staring at me. They wanted to see you too. The living tattoo untied a knot at his neck, and the cloak fell away. Nothing covered his body except for tattoos and a pair of briefs. Artistic masterpieces overflowed from one to the other. Textures so deep it seemed like no artist could possibly achieve. And they were all looking at me. Each mythological creature, human, alien, even the symbols seemed to somehow stare. My blood ran cold and I began to shiver. He stood, stepped forward, and wrapped his cloak around me. Suddenly, the shivering stopped. I felt warm again. I felt exhilarated. He reached out and took my hand, then pulled me close and whispered with a voice that sounded like 1,000 together, "Release me." I tried to let go of his hand, but he still held on to me with an iron grip. My mouth refused to open. My mind was a whirlwind. I couldn't think. As we stood face to face, hands still clasped, one of his tattoos moved. A tiny horse and chariot, carrying a Roman soldier, galloped down to the edge of his finger and disappeared. My jaw dropped open, but no words came out. My mind reeled when the horse and chariot suddenly appeared on my hand. I watched in shock as they rode up my arm and disappeared beneath my sleeve. The floodgates opened and all of the other tattoos followed suit. A sea of green flowed up my arm, disappearing under my clothes. until there was no more room and they flooded onto my face. While I watched my body being invaded by living pictures, I didn't notice my counterpart still held my hand. He had shrunk several inches while I had grown. His eyes were no longer inky pools of soulless black. They were green, the same as mine. In fact, his face was the same one I saw in the mirror each morning. His skin was milky white, just like mine used to be. Not a mark or blemish remained. My doppelganger and the carny took my clothes and put them on him, then wrapped me in the cloak. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I was dragged down into the chair, unable to move. My new tattoos laughed and carried on as though the clock had just struck 12 on December 31st. They mocked me and jeered at me as Johnny walked back through the torches and out of the tent. Sleep eluded me that night. The figures on my skin moved all night. It was like a colony of ants constantly crawling over every inch of my body. I tried scratching once. The pirate I had scratched over reared back and stabbed me with his sword. Unbelievable pain shot through my face. The rest of the night I just did my best not to go insane from the itching. But I never scratched again. The next day held a fresh hell. Sleep was a luxury that had eluded me. My torment was to live the nightmare of each tattoo. I was held down by the weight of the inky damnation, unable to move or even speak. Unfortunately, I could see the children who passed through wearing looks of shock and admiration. I could also feel the scorn of the mothers who hid their children's eyes and quickly moved on at the sight of me. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, in walked little Johnny with my mom holding his hand. She looked at me with the same scorn I had seen on the other mothers' faces. Honestly, I don't see why you wanted to see this so badly. You'll have nightmares for weeks. Don't worry, Mom, I think I'll sleep better than I have in a long time, he told her in my voice. She herded him away, repulsed by the sight of me. You just better not have any ideas of getting a tattoo of your own. He glanced back at me. I wouldn't dream of it. I bowed my head as he walked out with my mother, never to return. A tear formed in my black eyes when I noticed a new tattoo on my arm. It was a small boy with green eyes. I think it's safe to say that most teenagers are excited for when they get their first car. I know I was. The idea of being able to go where I wanted, when I wanted, with my parents' permission of course, was something I'd only been able to dream of before. Stuck in my rural home miles from the nearest point of interest, there wasn't really anywhere to go but the woods. I had gotten my license months prior, but wasn't allowed to drive my parents' cars after the test. So the day my dad gave me his old Camry after he got a new car was life-changing. For the next 2 weeks, I was my friend's chauffeur, and we'd go together to the mall and cinema in a relatively nearby town. A nearby nature spot great for fires and getting high, and getting to and from school on a regular basis. Then, one day while I was at school sitting with my friends James and Claire, James brought up a new place we could go. You ever heard of urban exploring? James asked Claire. No, is it like exploring the city or something? she responded. James laughed and looked at me. How about you, Elma? That's when you explore abandoned buildings, right? I replied. I'd heard about it before from my older brother, who had been an urbex fiend in college. Yup, James exclaimed. His eyes lit up. I heard about this place from Isaac in chemistry earlier. There's an abandoned farmhouse and a field in the woods, out near the golf course. Isaac said he's gone once, but apparently sissied out before he could really explore it. Hell no, Claire said. Oh come on, why not? James complained. I've seen enough scary movies to know what happens in abandoned farmhouses. No way. I laughed. She had a good point. James looked at me with a look of don't be a party pooper on his face. I'm down. What kind of junkie or murderer would want to hide in a boony trash heap like Franklin anyways? Come on, Claire, there's nothing to be afraid of, James said to Claire. Claire sighed. Fine, but I'm breaking a bat or something. After the final bell, James got the info from Isaac on how to get to the place. It was about a 30-minute walk into the woods from the nearby golf course. We decided we'd go around noon on that Saturday. We'd all tell our parents that we were going to be at the mall for a few hours, and catch dinner and a movie after, so we'd have plenty of time to explore. James and I were excited. Claire, less so. But I could tell part of her wanted to go. She just enjoyed being stubborn. When Saturday rolled around, I told my parents I was going out and hugged them goodbye. I got in the Camry, put on some tunes, and drove off to grab James and Claire. It was a bright, sunny day in autumn, perfect for exploring. After picking them up, we all ended up arriving at the golf course around noon. The air was stale and cool, and the sound of dry leaves scraping against each other in the wind filled the atmosphere as we made our way through the woods. There was no clear path through the forest that would lead to the abandoned farmhouse, but there were obvious markers like gnarled trees or cracked boulders that helped lead the way. Isaac had gotten a map from the older kids he had learned about the place from, and had it passed on to us. As we followed its directions, I felt eager to explore my first abandoned house. I knew my brother would be proud to hear I had gone on my first urban exploration. Are we almost there? Claire asked. Yeah, only a few more minutes probably. I think I can see a clearing in the distance, James replied. Word, I said. When Claire, James, and I breached the forest wall and entered the overgrown expanse of a field with the abandoned house sitting in the center, I felt a sudden nausea. It was brief, but overwhelming. You okay, hun? Claire asked, noticing my distress. Yeah, I'm fine, I panted. I just felt really sick for a second. I'm good now. James, are you sure about this? Claire said sheepishly. Seriously, Claire? We're here. You're not backing out. Do you really want to walk back through the woods by yourself? James said. He turned towards the house and began walking through the tall waves of grass. Claire sighed in exasperation and gripped the taped-up Louisville Slugger she was carrying. Wait up. The three of us made our way through the field, to the wraparound porch that clung to the side of the large wooden building. Its windows were boarded up from the outside, and the front door stood ajar, slamming about in the wind. The place was in poor condition, but still stood seemingly strong. The walls were covered in thick vines, and a large tree shadowed its eastern side. Suddenly, I felt another intense surge of nausea. I gripped my stomach and moaned. James put his hand on my shoulder. "You good?" "Yeah," I exhaled as the nausea faded away. "Sorry, I just keep feeling like I'm gonna puke. I want to keep going though." I walked up the steps of the house as James and Claire followed. The interior of the house was dim, with thin rays of light seeping through the cracks in the boarded windows. Leaves crunched under our steps as we wandered around the parlor, looking at dusty old picture frames and broken furniture. The place looked like it had been abandoned since the 60s. Its old floors creaked beneath my feet as I examined a photo of an attractive young man standing with his parents. I heard James enter the hallway and slowly ascend the groaning staircase. "Hey, be careful, the stairs are old," I shouted to him. I know. I could hear him say from the stairs. Claire and I continued looking around the first floor. "This place gives me the chills," she said. "It doesn't look like anyone's lived here in nearly 30 years, I replied. "I hope not. I don't want to run into some crazy hobo," she said. "In Franklin? Why would a hobo come to Franklin? There's not even a train station nearby." "I don't know, just..." Suddenly, we could hear James' heavy footsteps as he ran to the stairwell. "Elma, I need you to come here, now," James shouted with quivering panic in his voice. My heart sank, and again nausea welled up from within me. What is it?" Please just come here." Claire and I ran up the stairs and followed James into a dimly lit room at the end of a hallway. As soon as I entered, I too began panicking. "What?" I exclaimed. "What the hell? Are those pictures of me?" "Oh my god." I could hear Claire whisper in shock. The walls of the room in which we stood were plastered in endless photos of Polaroids of me. They were all candid shots from various points of my life. Baby photos through my parents' windows, pictures of me swimming in my neighbor's pool when I was in kindergarten, photos of my family and I eating dinner at a restaurant in Disney World, pictures of me sleeping in my room. Whoever took these photos had been following me for years, even to places I traveled. Short phrases like "love you" and "want you" and "need you" were written on the collage of photos in lipstick. Strewn about the floor were things of mine that had gone missing over the years. Stuffed animals, baby spoons, sippy cups, training bras, socks, earrings, and so forth. I was overwhelmed with a sense of dread that permeated my whole existence, haunting me to my core. That's when the door slammed shut downstairs, followed by heavy footsteps through the hallway. James, Claire, and I all began shouting over each other in our panic. The only way out was back down the stairs, but we could hear the footsteps begin to climb to the second floor. "Close the door," I shouted over James and Claire's frightened clamors. Claire sprang into action and slammed the room's door shut. James running over to a heavy wooden wardrobe, which he then shoved in front of the doorway. "We have to get the boards off of the window," Claire yelled as the heavy footsteps in the hallway approached the room. James and I immediately ran to the window and began kicking the rotten boards until they tumbled down the slanted roof of the porch. The room began to shake as whoever was on the other side of the door began to bang on it with intense ferocity and rage. As soon as there was an opening big enough to climb out of, I shouted, "Go, go!" and we all jumped onto the roof of the porch. As the three of us jumped from the roof onto an old rusted truck and onto the ground, we heard the wardrobe crash to the ground and the door slam open. I didn't turn back to look. We just ran. We managed to make it back to the car in what felt like half the time it took us to get there. Our breathing was short and our hearts were racing. I unlocked the car and we all jumped in, locking the doors behind us and speeding off. "We're going to call the police right now," I exclaimed. No one argued with me. They stayed silent as we hurried to the police department. Somehow, in our haste to get out, Claire managed to rip 3 photos off the wall that were clear creep shots. These were invaluable in getting the police to believe our story. We gave them the map and 2 officers went off to investigate. We waited at the station, all of us in shock, but particularly me. It was like my life had changed in an instant. I'd had some sicko following me, observing me, and admiring me for years with some sick obsession and unclear end goal. Strange sounds at night I had heard in the past, weird scratching on my window, things I had put off as coincidences or typical sounds for a rural home suddenly seemed much more sinister. I was shaking in my seat as we waited for my parents to come and for the cops to find the house. The cops radioed back that a large fire was spreading through the woods, near where the clearing was on the map we had given them. The burning was successfully controlled, but the abandoned farmhouse was eradicated in the inferno. There was no evidence left, no leads to follow. My family believed me and had seen the photos Claire had taken from the room. So we packed up and moved closer to my mom's family a few states away. Not long after, I began seeing therapists for the trauma of what I had seen. But even with their help, my incessant fear remained. I was always looking over my shoulder and making sure to draw the shades in every room I was in, regardless of what floor I was on. For years, I was terrified of the man who had been watching me for 17 years. Were they still following me after I moved out of state to attend college? When I started my family? Eventually, the fear was but a faint darkness in the back of my head. But today, I received an envelope with no return address that was covered in cutout pictures of my face with the eyes missing. The piece of paper inside had all the eyes glued to it, with the words "still watching" in smudged black lipstick, scrawled diagonally across the page. Included was a picture of my newborn daughter, sleeping in the crib I had just bought her 2 nights ago. It's not that he's a bad roommate. No, it's not that at all. If he was inconsiderate and doing something like leaving dishes and dirty socks all over the apartment, or playing death metal at 3 a.m., then maybe I'd feel justified in my dislike of him. If there was just one discernible grievance that I could explain without sounding immensely childish, then maybe I wouldn't feel so unsettled by his presence. But there's not. At least, not a good one. So I've kept it to myself until now. Let me preface this by saying Dave is polite, quiet, and clean. He's never been late on rent, and he always takes my boundaries into consideration. That might make it sound like he goes out of his way to avoid me, or that we never interact. But it's not like that. I talk to Dave more than I have my past roommates, and our conversations are pleasant. Never once have I argued with him. Dave just seems introverted, as am I, and we respect each other's space. If we are in the common area together, we'll sit and talk. We've even binge-watched a couple of Netflix series together, since we both are into the horror genre. Though I've had to tap out a few times. Dave's stomach for gore is much stronger than mine. So, to surmise, for the past year, Dave has regularly sat next to me on a ratty thrifted store couch, just shooting the breeze, and I've enjoyed our conversations. I'm telling you all this because I know that when I tell you what my problem with Dave is, everyone is going to try and tell me that I must have a problem with something else. I know that you'll try to tell me I'm just focusing on a little thing because there's something else. Something about his personality that unsettles me. But there's not. After almost a whole year of living with this man, I can safely say there isn't a single aspect of Dave's personality I find off-putting. I look forward to our Netflix nights, and think he is quite funny in a dry sort of way. He doesn't really do anything that would typically upset me. One of my biggest pet peeves from past experiences with roommates is when they take something of mine, batteries, clothes, money, without asking. Dave has never intruded on my personal space or stolen anything from me. Honestly, it should feel like I've hit the jackpot after my last roommate, Ryan. He ruined the sink by pouring hot grease down the drain, and bailed before fixing the damages. Ryan also had his girl over almost every night, and they were so loud that I received notes from the neighbors. Now, Dave's not asexual by any means. He's a couple years younger than me, 24. And like clockwork, he has a different woman come over every 2 weeks on Saturday night. The first month he'd lived here, he'd given me a heads up that he'd had a date. I immediately was reminded of Ryan and became worried that I'd gotten another roommate from hell. But nope, I was thankfully wrong. Each date night, Dave and some random girl stumble through the front door. Maybe the girl will wave at me or say hello. And if they do, that's the only thing I hear out of them. It's completely quiet after they enter Dave's room. I work from home, so I often sleep in late, especially on the weekends. Dave knows this, and honestly, I'm surprised by how much he takes this fact into consideration. I've already got a pair of noise-canceling headphones, purchased during the Ryan era, and I honestly don't mind wearing them to bed twice a month, but there's no need. Well, there's no need on his date nights. The other nights? Well, I'll get to that in a moment. The point I'm trying to make is that Dave is so respectful. I have never once been woken up by one of his one-night stands leaving. In fact, I've never even seen one leave. Dave is just that considerate. He keeps that entire part of his life as quiet as possible for my sake. He always makes breakfast the next morning. At first, I thought it might be as some sort of apology to me. Maybe thinking he'd been too loud or made me uncomfortable with his Saturday night antics. Even though I assured him as long as I don't have to hear it, I don't care what he's doing in his room. But now, I think it's some sort of ritual. Maybe a self-congratulatory thing. Either way, every other Sunday morning, I wake up to the aroma of meat frying. Dave keeps the fridge stocked up well with excellent cuts of meat, and he seems to love cooking, even if he doesn't eat much. Still, his largest smiles are reserved for sizzling meat. The nights after he gets lucky seem to be when he really gets into the chef zone. We have a meat grinder, just a small countertop appliance, and Dave uses the grinder to craft the most delicious sausages every other Sunday. He often shares his food with me, not stingy in the least. But he's particularly insistent that I partake on these mornings. I asked why once, and he simply said the meat is best eaten fresh. He seems to replenish his ingredients on Sunday mornings, though it's not exactly clear where he shops. I've never seen cuts quite this color or texture at our local grocery store. I'm pretty sure they're pork sausages, but they taste different, softer and juicier. If Dave opened a restaurant, I'm pretty sure he could be a billionaire. Dave's kindness makes me feel guilty. He shares so willingly and never oversteps any of my boundaries. None of my other roommates, and I've had 5 by this point in my life, have ever looked so happy to eat breakfast with me. Dave won't even let me pay him back for the meat, which I assume must be expensive due to its quality. But he just smiles and tells me it's much cheaper than I'd think. Writing this out, I realize how petty I sound. Dave gives from the goodness of his heart, whereas past roommates, cough cough, Ryan, stole food from Tupperware with my name written in bold, capital letters. Still, I think I'd take Ryan over Dave any day. And the reason is so stupid I don't even want to admit it in this Reddit thread anonymously. The thing about Dave is that he chews too loud. I know I'm going to be flooded with comments suggesting things like wear noise-canceling headphones, listen to music, or the good old, are you seriously that put off by his chewing? This kid is sharing food and walking on eggshells so that you don't feel uncomfortable. And yeah, I can see where those comments are coming from. But you don't understand. It's every night. I hear these noises through the walls. Headphones or not. It's this crunching, slurping sound that starts at 3 a.m. and goes on till the sun rises. The noises are so much louder and perversive than someone chewing potato chips with their mouth open. No matter what I try to block it out, it permeates through my defenses and echoes through my brain as loudly as microphone feedback. That horrid crunching sound punctuated by wet gulps and the occasional belch has become the soundtrack of my nightmares. Well, when I'm able to sleep long enough to dream, that is. I feel weird about bringing this up to Dave. Something in my mind is screaming out, saying that I absolutely cannot mention this to him. And I think I know why. Dave doesn't eat much aside from Sundays and the rare rib dinner. I never see him eat. He's so skinny that I suspect he struggles with some sort of eating disorder. I tried asking about this once in a roundabout way, and Dave had responded with, people often can't stomach the sight of my meals. So yeah, probably an eating disorder. Since he's so small, he might have experienced some bullying in high school, or maybe grown up in poverty, and developed some sort of issue with eating after he got money. Either way, that's just speculation. The little voice in my head keeps screaming, never bring up the sounds, because how awful would it be if I made him feel bad for simply eating at night? What if I worsened his condition? Would I have to watch Dave waste away because of a petty comment? I don't want to know the answer to those questions. All I know is he doesn't feel comfortable eating full meals in front of others very often. Again, it's been almost a year since he moved in, and he's still not even comfortable around me. Maybe he can sense my issue with him. I hope not, as I do think he's a wonderful person with the exception of this one petty thing. But back on the topic, the chewing. The only thing I can think to compare it to is my mother's dog. She had a pit mix named Daisy as I was growing up. She was a beautiful dog with short black fur that loved cuddling and was the epitome of sweetness. I thought she couldn't hurt a fly, but that thought was revoked in a violent fashion. One day, a friend of mine broke into our house. He was trying to pull a stupid prank and climbed through the kitchen window in a scream mask, intent on scaring me. And he did. I shrieked like a little girl and Daisy came barreling into the kitchen. I saw her mouth open. All of those white teeth suddenly looked much sharper as the muscles in her neck bulged. She seemed to practically soar past me. Daisy chomped into my friend's shoulder, knocking him down. There was this resounding crack as he fell. At first, I thought he hit his head on the counter, maybe even broken his neck. But the crack was actually Daisy locking her jaw in place and crunching into his collarbone. On the ground, Daisy didn't let go. She kept her mouth rigidly shut and shook her head back and forth. There was a wet tearing noise that seemed even louder than the screaming. I remember thinking that she was ripping him apart. In the end, my friend was relatively okay. He had to have reconstructive surgery on his shoulder and was in physical therapy for the duration of our high school careers. He walked away with minor nerve damage and a near debilitating fear of dogs. The doctors said he got off lucky. I'll never forget the sound of Daisy crunching into his bone, ripping the flesh off of his body with unnatural ease. I couldn't believe sweet Daisy, who loved to cuddle and once let a butterfly land on the tip of her nose, looked so natural with a mouthful of blood. I thought that she couldn't hurt a fly, but she nearly eviscerated my friend. Don't get me wrong, I still loved Daisy, and when she was taken away for aggression testing, and my mother told me it was likely she'd be put down, I sobbed for days. Daisy was my beloved pet, and I knew that ultimately she had only tried to protect me from what both she and I had perceived to be a threat. I was just shocked by what she had done, or rather, I was shocked by what she was capable of. And now, the sounds I hear from Dave's bedroom, the sounds that I cannot block out with noise-canceling headphones or music, the sounds that permeate my nightmares. These sounds sound almost exactly like Daisy ripping the flesh and crunching the bone of a person. I don't know if this is some sort of latent PTSD thing. Maybe I'm just now facing the trauma of seeing that much blood and confronting the fear that a much younger me suppressed. Maybe there's a rational explanation for why I'm so frazzled. I shouldn't be able to hear him so clearly. There's no sound when he has a woman over. I know that the walls, while not soundproof, are capable of blocking out most noises. The smack of David's lips as he appreciates a meal shouldn't be able to reach me, but it does. I lay awake each night, headphones around my head, clutching the pillow against them for extra protection, and I try to drown out the sound of Dave's chewing. I don't have anyone to talk to about this. I only have a few friends, and if I said this to them, they'd either think I was crazy or petty. Probably both. So I'm just trying to get this off my chest, and maybe get some advice from anyone else who couldn't seem to get over a petty grievance. Dave's been talking about renewing the lease, that we ought to stay roommates for another year, and I really can't think of a reason to say no, because the only thing about Dave is that he chews too loud. I wasn't supposed to be driving that night. Pat was supposed to be our designated driver, but they forgot about halfway through the night and started drinking heavily. I, having nursed the same cocktail up until I saw them getting red in the face and wobbly, knew my libations were over with then and there, and that their responsibility was now mine. I was annoyed, but since I hadn't intended on getting drunk that evening, I suppose Pat thought sobriety was wasted on them, and figured I'd all but offer to take their place. In any case, once the night was done, I helped Pat and our other friends, Cynthia and James, into the car and slipped into the driver's seat. Pat was mumbling something about what a great friend I was, and got nothing but daggers from me in return. The other two passed out before they even buckled up, forcing me to lean over them like a mother to secure them in place. Was I this bad when I drank? Another flash of annoyance hit me. They could all sleep soundly, leaving me alone, having to stay alert and awake to play taxi for them. What's more, I wasn't so keen on driving specifically Pat home. You see, there's this tunnel between their house and the center of town. And, well, it's just an ordinary tunnel as far as everyone else is concerned. I can't stand it. It makes my skin crawl because of something that happened when I was a kid. Honestly, it scares the crap out of me. I usually take a different route just so I can avoid it, but doing so adds an hour to the trip, and at 2 in the morning in a car that stank of crusted puke, I made the mistake of picking the tunnel. I want to be clear that when I said the tunnel scared me, I could never have predicted what happened that night. When I was a kid, my brother told me the tunnel was the mouth of a giant, and the only way to survive was to hold my breath the whole way through. Stupid in hindsight, but kids believe the weirdest superstitions. So I held my breath until I couldn't, until the world was almost nothing but darkness with a few small spots of light. And then, I let in the faintest of inhales and heard a shriek coming from the other end of the tunnel. I was convinced I'd made the giant aware of me, and now we were going to die. Can you imagine experiencing the genuine honest-to-goodness fear of death at that age? Now, of course, since I'm writing this, I didn't die in the belly of a monster. Instead, I hyperventilated with my hand slapped over my mouth, bracing myself for the worst, until we came upon a wreck. Someone had lost control of their vehicle and had driven right into the tunnel wall. That was the sound that I'd heard. I didn't see a simple accident though. Through the lens of a child's imagination, I saw the twisted metal as a car gnashed by the teeth of the giant. I saw the accident as somehow being my fault, all because I took a breath. I never wanted to go through that tunnel again after that, and if I had to, I held my breath the entire time just in case. As I got older, that fear morphed into avoidance of the tunnel, which leads us to this story, to me pulling up along the side of the road near the mouth of the tunnel, with my 3 friends passed out in the passenger seats. I think I was more anxious than scared. Something about the way the wind moved through the entrance put me on edge. I could hear the howls even with the windows rolled up. I figured I'd wait for another car to drive in first. It felt a little silly, but you know what they say, safety in numbers. It wasn't long before a little Corolla passed me and was engulfed in the darkness. I hit the gas and followed behind, trying not to be too creepy about it. It was nice to see the taillights blazing the trail in front of me. I followed it to about the halfway point of the tunnel, to the point where I used to start struggling to hold my breath. I could feel myself unintentionally holding it now. So far, it was going fine, and I even started to relax a little. It was the calm before the storm. Suddenly, something weird happened. The car in front of me began to shrink as though it had violently sped up. I accelerated to give chase, not wanting to lose its light. But no matter how fast I went, the distance between us only grew. I couldn't hear the revving of its engine, and I couldn't understand why, or how it was going so fast so quietly. It kept shrinking, illuminating what seemed like ever-encroaching tunnel walls. I would have stopped and turned around if I wasn't sure it was only an optical illusion. Likewise, I would have turned around if I'd realized I should have been long out of the tunnel by then. Sometimes you miss the forest for the trees, and that Corolla was my tree. By the time the Corolla became a blip on the horizon, I realized I was white-knuckling the steering wheel. I stopped focusing on my convoy partner, slowed, and took in the surroundings. Where was the left lane? Gone, I realized. I was tucked between narrow tunnel walls with the roof so low. If I'd been driving a van, the top would have scraped against it. My first thought was that I'd somehow veered into a maintenance tunnel, and I was lucky I hadn't scratched Pat's car in the process. And then, I noticed how dark it was, with the Corolla now completely out of view and no hanging lights. I could only see as far as my headlights shined. Something beyond that was pitch black, like in the deepest recesses of the ocean. I wasn't sure how far into the maintenance tunnel I was, nor whether it looped back to rejoin the main road. I didn't have room to turn the car around, and the thought of backing up the whole way filled me with a potent sense of dread. I didn't want to not look forward. Something told me I needed to keep my eyes on the road ahead. What was safer, the road not traveled, or the road I could barely see because Pat cheaped out and didn't get LEDs for his taillights? I swallowed a knot of apprehension, imagining myself in the throat of the giant. I tried to open the door, but I found the wall was too tight. I only had room to squeeze 1 foot out. Had the tunnel gotten narrower? No, there was no way. I closed the door and decided to keep going. If nothing else, I hoped the tunnel would widen enough for me to turn at some point. But I took it slow, the tires crackling beneath me. There was movement in my peripheral vision, and my eyes shot to the side view mirror, where I could have sworn I saw the concrete buckle behind me. I gritted my teeth and tried to shove Pat awake. To no avail. I could feel my skin, every inch of it. It's like I was suddenly hyper-aware of myself. It itched. Blood rushed to my head, and I swear I could feel my eyeballs move. I needed to expand. I needed to get out of the oppressive closeness. The walls were getting tighter. My throat was getting tighter. Breathing was getting hard. Was it my imagination? I smacked Pat in desperation, and although I wanted to try Cynthia and James, I couldn't bring myself to look in the back seat. I don't know why, but something in my gut told me that if I turned around, I'd find a concrete wall encasing me in the front. I don't know whether it was stubborn or stupid not to turn around. I don't know if it was false hope or logic or fear. I have no idea what compelled me to keep going. Even as I began to hear the scraping of the metal on concrete, even as my nails dug into the steering wheel and splintered, even as I gritted my teeth trying to will the tunnel to release me, that's when I heard a slap. It was strong. Wham! Against Pat's door. When I dared to look, the blood drained from my face. There was something in the wall. Something coming out of the wall, more like. Rocky fingers attached to palms squeezing against the glass. The wall rippled like a wave, and the hand rode it, giving chase. I sped up, not knowing whether I was being led like a lamb to the slaughter, or closer to my salvation. The hands kept pace, following me at 80 miles per hour like it was nothing. The walls were getting tighter. I was entombed in darkness. The walls were moving, solid but malleable, soft like liquid concrete, but when they hit the car, sparks flew. I realized I was screaming. I pushed down on the accelerator, testing the speed of the car. The hands followed. More hands. I could see them in the rearview mirror, in the side mirror, in front of me. They were everywhere, scratching and tapping at the car, trying to get in. I was still screaming so loud, my throat turned to sandpaper. Faces began to pull away from the walls. Mouths, eyes, and noses stretching out like shapes pushed through fabric. I couldn't tell whether I was still screaming, or if the yowls I heard were coming out of these concrete mouths. I just knew I needed to keep going. I needed to reach safety. I couldn't let them catch us. Catch me. Suddenly, I heard the familiar click of the door handle being pulled. Pat's door. In any other context, the sound wouldn't be so heart-stoppingly terrifying. In this one, it pushed me beyond the edge, in a place so deep into the well of horror that I became almost numb. My nervous system couldn't handle the sensory and panic overload. I think it's resignation. I think the realm beyond fear is a kind of acceptance to your fate, to your inevitable death. It's a kindness your body offers you in the last moments of your life, so that an imprint of fear isn't left behind when your soul leaves your body. Or maybe it's just for your loved ones so they can see you died peacefully, and can move on easier than if you kick the bucket in wild thrashes of agonizing fear, begging for help and sobbing. Point being, when the door began to jostle open, I felt this wave of near calm and closed my eyes to let it happen. I took my hands off the steering wheel and slowly released the gas pedal. And then, there was silence. There was no longer the grinding sound of metal on concrete, no screaming, no tapping or scraping or anything else like that. I opened my eyes in time to see the car puttering out of the tunnel finally, with the night sky blissfully far away, and the tree line giving me a very wide berth. The false calm turned into relief. The relief soured into fear as I thought about what had just happened, and it all sank in. You hear stories of injured people capable of incredible feats to save themselves, and the moment they reach safety, they collapse. That was me, essentially. I drove the car a bit farther down the road, and pulled off to the side. The stress had me shaking violently, and I could barely get my legs out of the car. I fell on all fours. I must have looked like a drunk. As I reeled on the grass, I could hear Cynthia and James waking up and asking questions from the back seat. Trivial. Why are we stopped? Or where are we? I couldn't care less about what they were saying. Now I know what you're thinking. The second I closed my eyes and accepted my fate, I was freed from the tunnel. It must have been all a bad dream, or some weird allegory for dealing with my childhood fear. You would be wrong. The car was scraped to all hell. There were dents in the metal shaped like large hands. And then, there was Pat. Pat, the designated driver who got drunk and forced me to take their place that night. Pat, my friend since grade school. Pat, who for the duration of the tunnel had been unresponsive to my screams and shakes and pleas to wake up. Pat, who was dead. Their face twisted in abject horror, as though they woke up just in time to see death coming for them. Pat, who hadn't had time to go through the stages of fear and reach that bliss before the end. The reason I now believe that the peace is more for everyone else's sake than one's own. Because now I know they died screaming. I know exactly what they felt like in those final moments. Because I'd felt every rung from that ladder of fear. But I had survived to tell the tale. Ultimately, Pat's death was ruled a heart attack. Officials think I fell asleep at the wheel, causing the car to veer into the wall before regaining control, which makes no sense. The scratches were on all surfaces of the car, even the undercarriage. But I suppose they were looking for an explanation, whether true or false. As for the tunnel, I don't intend to drive through it ever again. But from my research, I know one thing. I didn't know when it happened. There is no maintenance tunnel. There's just the main road, which means the only mistake I made that night was ever driving into the mouth of the beast in the first place. My wife and I just recently welcomed my sweet daughter into this world, but I've got a bad feeling she may not be as sweet as she seems to be to me. But to understand why I'd say that about my own daughter, I need to give a little backstory to the situation. We haven't been married very long, as it's not really frowned upon to marry soon in my family. But when we were first dating and staying with my parents, we slept in their living room, and when we woke up one morning, I noticed the door was still unlocked. But I was always sure to keep it locked. I never really noticed anything else though. I never saw any handprints on the door or windows. I never saw anything out of the ordinary at all that would be a telltale sign of an intruder. I brought it up to my dad, so he took me to his office to check the CCTV monitor. No one had approached the house all night. In fact, everything was eerily still except for a very large cat that would always hang out in their yard. That cat had been around for a long time though. We always thought maybe it was a neighbor's cat because we lived out in the back country of Texas, and there were other people out in the woods. But growing up there, I did actually notice a lot of things that scared the hell out of me. I once saw my cat Salem shapeshift right in front of my eyes when my little cousin and I were playing soldiers near the woods. One of the old men down the road would tell us stories of a panther that would kill people's horses, but I wondered if it was really my shape-shifting cat or something. My dad also told me a story of a man that lived on our land before we did, that killed his daughter's bus driver for what she said he did to her one day when she came home crying, and he would see the ghost of that dad standing over him while he slept, with a bloodstained t-shirt and evil radiating from his eyes, and of course, countless other stories of all sorts of things that go bump in the night. None of that really seemed related to that night I noticed the door was unlocked. However, since then, I've noticed a lot of things are different about her than she used to be, but nothing too extreme, just minor things. Things that only people really close to her would know. Like she started wearing makeup when she never really liked it before, and what she liked to eat changed. But I didn't really know how to explain it. I had only known her a few months, and only had to ask what she'd like to eat so few times for dates and family gatherings. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, or ask if something was wrong, she shot it down. So maybe I just had to deal with the fact that maybe I was just discovering her for who she really is. I got used to it. It wasn't a big deal after all. Like I said, it wasn't anything major, and she still seemed like the girl I loved. And like I said, we had only been dating a few months at the time. She also started calling me Delicious, which wasn't really a pet name we had used before. I tried to ignore how uncomfortable her tone was when she used it. It was probably just sexual anyway. More recently, I've noticed odd smells originating from under our house when I'm out working around the yard. I've also noticed a great number of flies and carrion birds. I was hoping a lost dog or some large rodent had just crawled under there and died. But one day, I found the promise ring I had given her that she said she had lost before we even moved to this house. It looked extremely old now and caked with mud. I started nosing under the house near where the ring was laying, and I found a large indentation on the earth as if something was laying there but had been moved. Soon after that day, she surprised me with the news that we were going to be parents, and I had been so excited at first until I realized something. I just knew my initial suspicions were proven true when she got pregnant. You see, my wife warned me right away not to expect children because of an accident she had when she was small. My wife was infertile. Hospitals, a place where the sick are cured, the wounded healed, and the dying saved. It is also a place where new life comes into this world. One can call this a haven of healing and happiness. However, not all may think the same. For them, a hospital is a place of pain, sorrow, and death. A place where the lie, "it's nothing serious," is blatantly used. They even consider it worse than a prison. Trapped in an empty room with a machine attached to you and silence haunting you at each passing minute. As for me, I believe in the latter. After only 3 hours on my first day as an admissions clerk, I can say with certainty that it is definitely not a haven. Sick and injured patients come with terrified expressions, unknowing of what they might get diagnosed with. It had only been a month since the hospital opened, and just yesterday, they put up an urgent hiring advertisement for a clerk in the night shift. The quoted salary package was handsome, so naturally, I applied. An hour later, I received a call from someone at the hospital. He wished to take the interview via call, to which I had no objections. After giving what I felt were the right answers, the person on the phone sounded pleased and offered me the position. I was told to join the very next day, which was pretty quick on their part. I assumed they were pretty short-staffed, as they concluded the hiring process in a matter of a few hours. That's how I ended up working here at this hospital. Looking at the structure of the hospital, one can tell it is a modern design. A small, minimalistic, square-shaped building with glass windows lining each floor. Though the hospital was not that huge, its simple yet clean design made it stand out from the rest of the worn-down buildings surrounding it. The ground floor was complete and operational. However, the upper floors all the way to the third level were not. Construction had abruptly stopped for some reason, which I assumed was due to lack of funds. Entering the hospital, you are greeted by the admissions desk on the center left and an elevator across it on the far right. On either side of the admissions desk were the patient wards. The ward doors had a high-tech lock system, which only opened when it was scanned with a special key card, given to all the staff members. In the front and right side of the hospital were various rooms allocated to doctors. During busy hours, patients and doctors alike would be seen entering and exiting these rooms. The striking thing about the hospital's interior was that there were no stairs that connected to the upper floors. The elevators were the only means used to access them, and it was closed off due to the construction. This wasn't an issue, as I was told there wasn't anything in the upper floors. My shift started at 8 p.m., and after only 3 hours, I was pretty exhausted. I looked to my left and saw Mr. Rahim, my fellow clerk as well as my superior, was doing just fine. Interacting with that many patients really drains me out. How do you stay this active and fresh after all that work? I asked Mr. Rahim as I rested my head on the desk. Well, I've been here for about a year, so I've gotten used to it, said Mr. Rahim with a smile. Besides, it's not that much work anyway, so get up. I don't want to see you lacking on your first day. I groaned as I got up. Thankfully, there hadn't been any new patients for some time, so I was able to rest up a bit. A pair of nurses passed by in front of us, whispering something among themselves. They looked a bit anxious as they sat down on a couch at a distance from me. The only things I could make out from their conversation were disappeared, and I hope they found her. They look a bit worried. Is everything alright with them? I asked Mr. Rahim, who too was watching the nurses. He didn't answer right away, and when I shifted my gaze towards him, I noticed that he had a troubled expression on his face. Since you now work here, I guess it is fair that you know as well, stated Mr. Rahim. Know what? I asked as I cut in between what he was about to say. 2 days ago, a patient escaped the wards, and sadly, we have no idea where that patient is. Isn't it a possibility that the patient just left the building? It was a stupid question, but I couldn't help it. It is possible. However, the 48-year-old patient, Miss Lubna, was diagnosed with ataxia, and her condition was deteriorating quick. Not only that, but she also has acute blindness, so it is not possible for her to walk out from the building on her own. Besides, The hospital only has 2 exits, the main entrance and the back door, and the security cameras caught no footage of her leaving. The windows are also out of the option as they are completely shut. What about the police? Have they been informed of this? We haven't yet. The owners of the hospital are afraid that it would lead to a bad image of the hospital, so we are simply trying to find the patient on our own. What's worse is that's not our only issue. There's more? Apparently the clerk whose position you filled in, Mr. Cameron, has also been missing since that day. The last footage of him was entering the patient's ward. After that, him and Miss Lubna simply vanished without a trace. I tried to take this all in. It sounded comical, almost like Mr. Rahim was teasing me on my first day. But his expression remained serious throughout. Even now, there was no hint of a smile on his face. Don't wrap your head around this too much. I only told you this so you weren't in the dark about it. For now, just focus on your work. Easier said than done. How was I supposed to entirely ignore that story and focus on work? I just gave a nod and started to arrange some papers. It was now almost 12 a.m. 2 doctors, Dr. Hassan and Dr. Faison, were idly chatting in front of me while 3 nurses sat on the couches. Basically, all of the night shift staff was killing time in the main area. I myself wasn't doing anything but aimlessly scrolling through my social media when a single ding interrupted us. The elevator panel lit up and showed the elevator was coming down from the 3rd floor. Mr. Rahim, I thought the upper floors were empty, and there was no one up there. I asked, a bit puzzled. I was told the same, said Mr. Rahim as he got up and made his way around in front, blocking my view. Another ding signaled that the elevator had reached the ground floor, and the door slowly started to open. I tried to get a glimpse of who it was, but the people in front of me blocked my view. Then I heard one of the nurses scream, followed by 2 words from Mr. Rahim that set a chill down my spine. Dear Lord. I got up from my chair and almost puked at what I saw. In the center of the elevator was a heavily mutilated corpse of what was once a person. The arms and legs had been ripped off and interchanged with one another, meaning the legs were sticking out from the arm sockets and the arms from the leg sockets. The head had been cut off clean and was planted in the chest. The inside of the elevator was covered in blood, and on the back wall was written, "Not the one," in blood. Everyone stood frozen in shock at what they saw. Dr. Hassan was the first one to come out of shock and move towards the body. He called for someone to help him move it, but no one moved an inch. He then motioned towards me, which brought me back to my senses. I shakily went to him and lifted the body out of the elevator. The moment we stepped out of the elevator, the doors closed behind us and the elevator powered off. What the hell just happened, and whose body is that? Shouted Dr. Faison. Mr. Rahim and Dr. Hassan slowly examined the body. Suddenly, Mr. Rahim stopped and exclaimed, "Lord, I think it's Cameron. The face is heavily disfigured, but these were the clothes he was wearing the day he went missing." I try to absorb all of this. The previous clerk shows up dead and his body is heavily disfigured, and what could possibly be assumed as the work of a psycho killer, which meant we now have a problem on our hands. Let's call the police now. There could potentially be a psycho killer hiding in the upper floors, I said. Like hell we are, the owner strictly told us to solve the issue without involving any outside party. I don't want to lose my job here because of some wannabe smart aleck kid, replied Dr. Faison. Are you crazy? There's a dead body here. This is no longer a matter that we can solve ourselves. Dr. Faison was spewing nonsense. How can we stop a suspected killer ourselves? Alright, that's enough. Let's first put the body somewhere for now and clean up the blood here. We have patients in the ward, and I don't think it would be good if any one of them saw this sight. We should keep this to ourselves for the moment and see what we can do, said Dr. Hassan. True, it would be better for us to close off the hospital for the night as well, to prevent any more people entering the building, added Mr. Rahim. His eyes showed terror. Dr. Hassan nodded at that, and turned away from everyone else. At that moment, I clearly saw the fear in his eyes. He was trying his best to stay calm, but everything that just happened was too much. Dr. Hassan faced us all again and then directed each of us some tasks. After some complaining, Dr. Faison and the 2 other nurses carried the dead body to the emergency room. The other nurse and Dr. Hassan went to explain the ruckus to the rest of the patients in the ward, as being merely a drunkard entering the hospital. Mr. Rahim and I went to close down the entrance. We pulled down the shutters in front of the hospital doors, and turned off the lights outside. I don't know what's even going on here. First, 2 people went missing here, and then one of them turns up dead, muttered Mr. Rahim. I wasn't doing any better myself. My hands were shaking violently as I secured the shutter in place. At about 1 a.m., we all gathered back in the lobby. I was the first to break the silence. What do we do now? If all goes well, we may be able to make it through the night. But then what? It would be wise to call the police, but as Dr. Faison pointed out, we shouldn't involve any outside party. We would be the prime suspects if the killer simply escaped from the roof. The other issue we would face is that we weren't able to guarantee safety for our patients, as Miss Lubna is still missing, responded Dr. Hassan. I started to question again, but then the lights went out. Even the backup generator didn't start. The only light now was coming from the streetlights outside. Before we could react, the elevator panel once again lit up with a ding, and the elevator slowly went up to the 3rd floor. All of you hide somewhere. Either the killer is sending down Miss Lubna, or the person is coming down themselves, commanded Dr. Hassan. The doctors and nurses hurriedly hid in the doctors' rooms. Mr. Rahim and I hid under the admissions desk. I would rather not imagine what the killer might have done to Miss Lubna's body. I tried to calm down my breathing so that I don't give myself away. After about 10 seconds, a ding sound pierced the silence and I heard the elevator doors open. I held my breath, hoping it wasn't anything worse, but obviously, I was wrong. Following the sound of the doors opening, I heard a footstep and then another. Whoever it was just exited the elevator. The elevator doors then closed. The person slowly made their way towards the admissions desk. I clasped my hand over my mouth so that I didn't make any noise. I had no way of telling who it was. Was it the killer? Did that person have any weapons with them? The footsteps stopped. The only thing separating us and that person was just a thin layer of wood. I then heard something smack the desk right above me. "Dear, is anyone here?" It was a female voice. I turned to Mr. Rahim, and he mouthed the words, "Miss Lubna." I tried to get up, but Mr. Rahim held me down and signaled me to wait. Before I could object any further, Mr. Rahim's eyes suddenly widened. He was looking at something behind me. I slowly turned around and froze in horror. It was dark, but the light from the streetlights outside was just enough to see Miss Lubna's neck had extended 10 meters, and her head was searching behind me. From the sound of light tapping, her fingers on the table, on the desk above me, I could tell that her body was still standing right where it was before. I was scared, too scared. My body refused to move. I could not believe what I was seeing. "Where are you?" asked Miss Lubna. It almost sounded like she was mocking us. Her head turned around and our eyes met. They were completely white, and she had a grin on her face. A second passed, then another. Her head slowly scanned Mr. Rahim and I, and then retracted back. I heard footsteps move away from the desk. "Where are you, dear? Is no one going to welcome me?" I slowly let out my breath. I had no idea I was holding it in. Furthermore, I looked at my hands and saw they were shaking violently. I looked towards Mr. Rahim and saw that he was sweating. What is that thing?" I whispered. My voice was trembling. Mr. Rahim just shook his head. It looked like he had lost his voice. A door opened to the right, and I heard hurried footsteps towards Miss Lubna. "It's Miss Lubna. She looks alright. We should attend to her and see if she suffered any injuries." It was Dr. Faison. "Doctor, wait, something's not right," shouted Dr. Hassan, but it was already too late. "Dear, is that you?" I silently glanced over the desk and saw the horror unleash. Dr. Faison stopped just a few steps from Miss Lubna. "Dear, you don't look right. Let me fix you up," said Miss Lubna as she jumped on top of Dr. Faison. "What are you doing, woman? Get off of me!" shouted Dr. Faison. Then I heard a bone crack, followed by a scream. Miss Lubna ripped off Dr. Faison's right arm. Dr. Faison howled in pain as blood splattered the floor. Yes, let the hot nectar spill forth and bathe me in red. Let me drink the wine of thy sacrifice, shouted Miss Lubna. I was frozen in fear yet again. My legs refused to move. Mr. Rahim was the same. His eyes were transfixed on the horror. We didn't move an inch. I couldn't see properly due to the darkness, but it looked like Miss Lubna shoved her hand straight into Dr. Faison's chest, after which she stopped moving. Oh dear, you stopped moving. You were not the one then, said Miss Lubna as she got up. I did hear the presence of one other nearby. I'll make sure my playthings don't leave just yet. With that, she raised her hand towards the sky and started chanting in an unknown language. Just as she finished, I grabbed my left hand as I felt a burning sensation in my left wrist. Mr. Rahim was also clutching his left hand. The pain subdued in a few seconds, and a red mark that resembled the mathematical division sign showed up where the pain began. Miss Lubna dragged Dr. Faison's body with one hand and held her arm in the other and headed towards the elevator. "You may not be the one, but you'll do for now." The elevator doors opened, and she got in, dragging Dr. Faison's body. I got one last look at her blood-smeared grin before the elevator doors closed. The elevator traveled to the 3rd floor, after which the panel turned off. With that, the lights in the hospital came back on. "What in the world just happened?" questioned Mr. Rahim. Dr. Hassan also came out from the doctor's room. It seemed like he closed the door once Miss Lubna attacked Dr. Faison. "I don't like using this term, because it makes me sound unprofessional. But that thing was not human. It was definitely a demon," stated Dr. Hassan. One of the nurses came out of hiding and darted towards the hospital entrance. "I don't want to die, I don't want to die," she muttered. As soon as she grabbed the door, she screamed and then doubled over. I must have found my strength because I ran towards her with Dr. Hassan right behind me. I looked to see what had happened and saw that the nurse's left arm was completely covered in burn marks. "What is going on?" said Dr. Hassan in a low voice. We carried the nurse back and laid her on one of the couches. Within seconds, some patients came out of the wards, demanding to know about the screaming. Some were clutching their left wrist as well, which I assumed they too got the mark. Upon seeing the blood in the lobby, they stopped. Is that blood?" asked one of them. "We have a situation on our hands," stated Dr. Hassan as he tried to hide the fear evident in his face. I looked towards the elevator, the panel blank, as if it never once turned on. We couldn't believe it at first, no matter what my boyfriend and I tried. Held down the power button, unplugged it out of the wall, took out the battery, and so on. My laptop just wouldn't shut down. The screen was frozen and not responding, but it baffled us how that thing kept working without electricity, and for 3 days straight. I had it for more than 14 years at that point. Jordan always teased me to get a new one. I guess he got annoyed having to fix it every now and then. "You're probably the last person on Earth that uses Windows XP," he often joked. But I love the old thing, and I intended to use it until it finally dies or falls apart in my lap. I didn't care that it was slow as hell, and struggled when multiple tabs were opened in the browser. Come to think about it now, I'm not entirely sure why I was so attached to it. It was good enough for what I needed, I guess. And to be honest, I didn't want to spend money or buy a new one yet. As I said, the laptop sat frozen and miraculously alive on our coffee table for 3 days. The fan huffed and puffed incessantly, and the computer got hotter than usual. Even in our bedroom, with the door closed, we could hear it. Things took a weird turn on the 3rd night around 3 a.m. "Grace, do you hear that?" Jordan asked. It sounded like someone was talking quietly in the living room, and the sound was mixed with the fan noise. Yeah, what is that?" I said all groggy. We got up, went to the coffee table, and stood there in silence, listening. It seemed like the laptop speakers were picking up a feeble radio signal. It was a male voice reciting something, but we couldn't make out the words. We both kneeled and positioned our ears near the speakers. "It's definitely not English," Jordan said. We were both pretty sure we heard the word retro, but it was difficult to pick out anything else. I have an idea, Jordan said. He went to get his toolkit and started undoing the little screws on the laptop's underside. Carefully, he took out the fan and it stopped spinning at last. We could hear the man on the speakers somewhat better, but the sound was still distant and there was some buzzing interference. I grabbed a pen and paper and started writing down the words. I managed to catch this partial sentence. Vade retro satana. It turned out that was enough. A quick Google search revealed that it was actually Vade retro satana, or Be Gone Satan in Latin, and was part of an exorcism formula that, when translated in English, went, May the Holy Cross be my light, may the dragon never be my guide. Be gone, Satan. Never tempt me with your vanities. What you offer me is evil. Drink the poison yourself. And the words in Latin matched what the man was chanting over the speaker. I was getting kind of excited about this mystery, to be honest, though we still weren't sure if someone was messing with us. The man just repeated the same formula, with a booming but distant voice, and nothing else, pausing every now and then. I could feel the heat radiating from the laptop. Jordan said he was curious to see how long it will last without a fan. We were still whispering for some reason. What do you think this is? I said. Jordan scratched his beard. Well, either we're somehow overhearing an exorcism, or more likely, it's a scene from a movie or a radio play, I guess. But I don't understand how the laptop speakers are picking this up. We continued listening, and at times we thought we could hear other voices in the background. Jordan studied the piece of paper on which I wrote the verses. Vade retro satana? He read the words out loud. Perhaps he realized there was no point in whispering, and to our surprise, the man stopped speaking abruptly. We looked at each other, confused and waiting, and for a moment, I thought the sound had ceased completely. But the man muttered something unintelligible, and then spoke loud and clear in English. I shall not listen to thee, devil. Go back where you came from. You can hear us? Said Jordan. I command thee to leave this girl, the man said with a thundering voice. Well, I command you to leave my laptop, I yelled back. Laptop, is that thy name, demon? Who are you? Jordan asked. I'm a servant of God Almighty. I will not give thee my name, demon. Do not try to trick me. Fine, I guess we'll just call you Dan, said Jordan. Look, Dan, can you please tell us where you are and what you are doing? Silence. Every night you torment this honest family with your hellish moans and cries. Leave. We are doing no such thing, I said, and we're not demons. You use this poor girl's mouth to shout the most unnatural cries. With their hands in blood, you write your devilish symbols on the walls. Again, I have no clue what I started saying. Jordan raised his index finger. What's on the wall, Dan? You know what you wrote, laptop. A slight hint of burnt plastic was coming from the laptop. It was so hot at that point that I couldn't hold my hand on it for long. Okay, I promised to leave this girl and her family alone. If you answer truthfully to my questions, alright? What the hell are you doing, Jordan? I whispered. Let's see where this goes, okay? He said defensively. I do not make deals with Hellspawn. Now And that's the first time we heard another voice talk to us besides Dan's. It was a woman. Please, I'll answer what you want instead of the priest. Just leave my child alone. Jordan and I looked at each other. My boyfriend then shrugged and said loudly to the laptop, "Deal." I slapped his wrist disapprovingly, but deep inside I also wanted to know how this played out. "Alright," said Jordan. "First, what year is it?" There was some back and forth between the woman and the priest, we assumed, but we couldn't make out a thing. Then, the woman said, "The year of our Lord, 1898. There was some muttering again. It seemed that the woman was reciting a small prayer. "Are we somehow listening to the past somehow?" I whispered. "I don't know," Jordan said. "Ask them what's on the wall." Jordan raised his voice. "What is written on the wall?" The woman spoke again. "There are a lot of boxes, and on the top of each one, in the right corner, there's a small cross." "Aha," I said out loud. "See, how can we be demons if there are crosses?" The priest said, "Tricks, the devil can even quote scripture if it suits his purpose." "Please, let the woman continue," said Jordan. "In the middle of each box, it says a fatal error has occurred. Press OK to continue," said the woman. "Then there's a small box underneath with the letters of O and K." My jaw dropped. I've seen that before. We gaped at each other in disbelief. Jordan pulled out his phone and after a moment of Googling, he said, "And the unnatural cries of your daughter, do they sound like this?" Then he played the Windows XP error sound. We heard a few screams. They really didn't like it, it seemed. "Yes, that's the cry," said the woman finally. A thin wisp of smoke came from the side of the laptop. The smell of burning plastic was almost unbearable. "And what is your name and your daughter's name? Where do you live?" asked Jordan. Dan interjected before the woman could answer. "That's enough, demon. I will not let you take this poor woman's soul. Now leave as you have promised." All right, said Jordan. "I'll give you a formula to recite, okay? After you do so, I should be gone. At least I think so. Do not attempt to trick me, Laptalk. My faith is strong. I will not use your spells." Jordan paused for a bit and then said, "Then let the mother do so. Say these words in order, okay? Alt F4. You got that?" The woman repeated the words loudly and without hesitation despite the priest's protest, and it seemed to have produced some effect because a second later loud gasps came over the speakers. It sounded like there were more people in that room than I first thought. One of them shouted, "Witchcraft!" "What's happening? Tell us," I said. "A box has disappeared from the wall," the woman said. "That part is now as clear as the day it was painted." "Repeat it again until all the boxes are gone and once more," Jordan said. And the woman did so, each time followed by a round of gasps. "There's a different box now, and in the middle it says shut down." "Okay, I know what that is," said Jordan. "Say the word enter. Just that one word." The woman repeated the command, and the speakers played the Windows shutdown sound. The laptop screen finally went black. Half a second later, all hell broke loose. The laptop burst into flames. I ran to the kitchen to get water. Thick black smoke filled the apartment quickly, and the smell stung my throat. I couldn't see a thing. I fumbled through the smoke with a Tupperware full of water in one hand. But there was something wrong. The chairs and other furniture I held onto while trying to navigate the room did not have the same feel or shape to them. Then, I ran into Jordan. But when we collided, I saw the face of a stranger. It was a clean-shaven, middle-aged man with a clerical collar. He seemed to be equally scared and surprised to see me. I dropped the water on his feet and ran away, screaming, "Jordan, there's someone here." I heard my boyfriend scream too, and I followed his voice. I bumped into something and fell on a bed that was definitely not supposed to be in our living room. There was a girl on the bed who screamed when I fell on her. To my horror, I saw that her hands and feet were tied with rope. With a hoarse and tired voice, the child yelled, "It's you. He's gonna take you. And us. We'll be with him forever." I was paralyzed with fear. A moment later, I felt hands grabbing my shoulders. I screamed like never before in my life. Then I heard Jordan's voice behind me. "Let's go, now," he said. We ran blindly and somehow managed to find a window. Jordan opened it and helped me get through. A few moments later, we were outside, breathing in fresh air and coughing our lungs out. There wasn't any fire that we could see inside, just thick black smoke. The smoke was definitely something unnatural because it started disappearing just as fast as it manifested in the first place. We watched in disbelief as the thick black cloud retreated back inside the house, instead of gushing out the open window. Peering inside, we could see it flow to one central spot in the living room. Distorted screams came from the black, gassy mass. I swear that at some point as it shrank, the smoke formed the shape of a person, and then, in a split second, it was gone. The screams cut off abruptly. When we went back into the house, there was no fire damage nor blackened walls, and no one else was there. We found a lump of molten plastic and metal on the coffee table where the computer stood. I guess it really is time to buy a new laptop.